Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about Commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz and I'm joined by my puntastic co-host. He stood on his left foot for the entire New Year's countdown. That way, when he finally took a step, he was starting things off on the right foot. It's Dana Roach.
Well, as you said, Joey, we're recording this on New Year's Eve, as was implied there, and my main resolution going into 2026 is to read more. So my plan tonight is to turn on subtitles on the Stranger Things finale.
Wow.
So I can just get started right away.
Wow, okay. I'm not sure that counts as reading there, Dana, but I support your decisions regardless.
Jokes like that, Joey, are why we're friends forever.
Yeah. I see what you did there, too. That's extremely clever. Friends forever on the guards. I like that a whole lot. Well, Dana,
Matt would have appreciated that one.
Yeah. Happy New Year. By the time this one's coming out, we will finally be in 2026, and we have a tradition to uphold. We're here talking about our game data that we have now been tracking for 3 years. This is a pattern of episodes that we've done over the past 2 years. We've got another entry now here. The thing is, though, Dana, we're now tracking so much data that I don't know that we can fit it all into a single episode. But here in this episode, we're going to be looking at some high-level stuff. Like, does going first affect how often people win? Does it give you a huge advantage in that realm? Or how is it that games end? The effects of fast mana. How long do games go? And not just that, but like how long do games go when broken down by bracket? We've got a bunch of those things that we tracked across our data that we can't wait to share with everyone. I'm really excited about this whole project. There's just so much of it that we're tracking now.
Yeah.
It's a whole heckin' lot, man. It's a whole heckin' lot.
Yeah, I mean, we'll touch on a little bit of our specific deck data in this show just for context, but next week's when we'll really break down and delve into how our decks performed on an individual level. This is going to be more about like high level things. When did games end? How many, turns did it go if someone put a Soul Ring on turn one, that kind of thing.
Yeah. That, and not only that, I also am interested to see how it is that brackets have affected all of this data as well. Do we see significant differences in like game length or stuff like that across each of the brackets too? Does that line up with the expectations set by that system, etc.? So there's a whole bunch for us to dig into for sure. This is one of my favorite episodes that we do just across the entire show, Dana. I'm so freaking excited to start off the year with this one.
Yeah, this is always a blast to do. Maybe we'll convince Matt to do it one of these years so he can actually join us, although I'm not sure if numbers are really Selesnya players' thing, but maybe we'll see what we can do here.
Yeah, it's a very math is for blockers type of attitude there. Yeah, but we have tracked our data of across 2023 and then 2024, and now we have the results to share with everyone from 2025. And I think we should just get right into it. Let's start off with the simple thing of like how many games did we play and our win percentages, and see whether or not it lines up with our previous win percentages of past years. So in 2023, I saw that of the 217 games that I played, I had won 33% of them. In 2024, I had played only 141 games and I'd won 34% of those. Here in 2025, I'm happy to report that I played 175 games, and it turns out I won 36% of those. So I have this very small incremental increase that I get to share with the class here of like, all right, cool. But like overall, we're seeing quite a bit of consistency there. I'm wondering if that consistency also remains the same for you.
It has. So 2023, I played 338 games. I won 41% of them. 2024, I played 318, so I played 20 games less there and won 44%. 2025, 332 games, and I won 43%. So I'm staying at roughly the same win percentage as well, with, averaging about 320 some games a year.
Okay. I want to see if you can get to like a full, I played at least one game per day of the year. Can you get to a 365 one of these times? I challenge you to that here in 2026. But we definitely see a disparity here. And this is something we've talked about in previous episodes. Folks have noticed like your win percentage is pretty high there, bud. It's worth us acknowledging that. Like you would anticipate that in a, expected 4-player game that the win percentage is on average going to be like 25%.
Yeah.
We both have higher than that. And yours by quite a substantial margin. A margin that I feel I've mentioned to you before is like, if that was my own personal number, I'd be like, am I punching too hard or something like that? So I think it's worth us unpacking that real quick before we move on to the rest of our data. Yeah,
definitely. One thing I will note with the advent of the bracket system, it makes it much easier to like look at a deck and say, okay, well, this is a bracket 3 deck that I won, 48% of my games with or whatever it is.
Okay.
Would that be a problem against most other people's bracket 3 decks? And there is a lot of external factors here as well. For example, one of the things we've talked about in the past a little bit is like, just as content creators, we just play a lot of games.
We eat, sleep, live, and breathe this game. Yeah. So there's a lot of attention forced on it for sure.
The analogy I've used before is like, everyone grew up with a friend whose parents had a pool table in their basement. Mm-hmm. And while that person may not have been an amazing pool player, just by virtue of having access to a pool table, they've like won whenever you played pool. Mm-hmm. I've played 1,000 games of Magic in the last 3 years. I mean, that's a lot of Magic, right? Like, that's a lot of EDH games.
Well, when you put it that way.
Not that you don't play a lot of games, but like, I've played twice as many games as you over the course of that 3-year window. Now, does that cause a 10% difference? I don't know, but like, it probably doesn't hurt when you get that many reps at something and that much practice. You're just going to help you out. So like, I think that's definitely a factor. And you actually have posted a link here in our notes from a comment someone made last year that I thought was interesting.
Yes, this was something that I wanted to inject into the conversation as well, that I do think is worth pointing out about the different ways that we play. And this is one of the things that makes it so nice to have both of our data sets here. So it's not just one person. It's not like we're not the Lorax. We don't speak on behalf of all the trees. Right. This is just our particular slice of data here. But someone did leave a comment on last year's episode when we were looking over our data from 2024, where we saw, again, your relatively high win percentage. They speculated that your win percentage is higher because you're playing against strangers more often. Playing against a dedicated play group, on the other hand, means you might encounter a rougher meta. And I wanted to bring that to the table to be like, is this something that we could look at that kind of contextualizes your numbers, which I do actually think holds a lot of water here, because I do play against more regularly groups of people that I already know and who will see a deck that I have and clock it. And they'll be like, I know Joey's Achilles heel with this one. I've played against it before. I know what the deal is. Compared to you play against strangers at an LGS a lot more frequently, hence the increased number of games. And that might leave open some of those opportunities where people don't know the Achilles heel of that deck. It's a little bit more unusual. And I do think that does kind of assist in some ways here that matters, a bit. I think that should be in this conversation for sure. I really like the thing that this person pointed out.
I think not only is that true, I think that factor is compounded by the fact that I tend to play relatively obscure commanders.
That's a dang fact.
So when you're sitting down at a table with people not only do they know how you play, maybe know what your tendencies are, and I see less of that playing with strangers. They're also facing decks that there's a really good chance they maybe have never seen before.
Right.
And it's going to be doing things they're unfamiliar with. My Veil Haunted One deck, where I'm gonna activate Veil a bunch of times to buff all of these otherwise unassuming wizards up and swing through for lethal damage.
Yes.
If you've never seen that before, you're gonna have no idea what's happening until all of a sudden you've got a bunch of like 12 wizards swinging at you. So yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think not only is it true, it's compounded by just the way I tend to play.
Yeah, people have played against Lathrils before. They kind of know what to expect from a lot of Lathrils. Sure. If you've seen the Ur-Dragon, you're like, I'm pretty sure I know what the deal is with the Ur-Dragon. Both still extremely powerful, and therefore you must pay attention to them. It's not like you can just ignore those, but it does give you an under-the-radar-ness to it, which allows for more surprise factors in your games that I do think is really worth pointing out. This is a little bit of a spoiler, but one of my most obvious here's what it does decks is my Sir Conrad deck. And spoiler alert, everyone, it doesn't have a good win percentage this year. It really doesn't, because people know the lay of the land with Conrad. Whereas when you play, I don't know, Ardbert or whatever, people haven't heard of that one. So they're not sure what to expect. And I think that has gone a decent amount of the way in helping with some of the win percentage stuff there. And that is a characteristic of a lot of your decks compared to mine and compared to a lot of the popular things out there. So that is a thing that I wanted to set up front with our win percentages there. I do think that that's good context for us to have, but also potentially something that as we look into data more throughout the rest of this episode, encourages us to ask, like, okay, so what are these decks? Where are we playing them? And is that a thing that we could take different actions on once we look at the individual deck breakdown again later on? Well, Data, did I just call you Data?
You did. You're really excited for the Star Trek set this fall.
No, I promise I'm not, actually. But anyway, well, Dana, before we get too much farther into the rest of our figures here, did going first help people win more games? Or how long do games go? Let's real quick do a couple of quick shout outs from our sponsors before we continue with the rest of our data.
We are excited to be teamed up with Dragon Shield moving into 2026. We all got a peek at their Landfall sleeves featuring fetch lands from Tarkir at Atlanta this fall. And when we posted pics on social media, we all had friends asking us to try to get them sleeves from their favorite color pair before they were even on sale. I gave out probably half a dozen boxes of Dragon Shield sleeves as Christmas presents this year. So beat that, Santa.
Wow.
And if you use the promo code EDHREC in all lowercase at dragonshield.com to get 5% off your next purchase, it helps the show and it helps your cards stay safe.
This show is also brought to you by you, our lovely patrons at patreon.com/EDHRECast. If you've been listening to this episode so far and thinking stuff like, man, I want to track my games too, the way that these guys are doing it to see what I can find out about my decks, I have a fun surprise. I am currently working with a friend who is a full-time spreadsheet expert to make a super easy data tracking sheet for our patrons as one of our Patreon perks. That is currently in the works. You can look forward to that very, very soon. And of course, you can also find other great perks on our Patreon too, from exclusive content to Discord access to our list of all the challenges stats picks that we've done throughout the entire history of the show. Supporting us in free ways like leaving a review or liking our videos, subscribing on YouTube, that means a whole lot. And supporting on Patreon also means just so much to us too. So we hope that you enjoy the cool perks that we have on offer over there. And in fact, there is one last thing to do as well. That is our Patreon shout out. For this first episode of 2026, let's hear it for Mariano Collin. Mariano, you're the heckin' best. We wish you a wonderful new year and hope you had a fantastic holiday season. Mm-hmm. Let's go on to our next thing here. Each of us also tracked this year how each of the games ended, whether they ended through combat damage, whether it was through a combo, whether it was from commander damage specifically, damage or life loss effects, if mill won any games, alt win conditions, poisoned and infect. So we wanted to track how it is that the final person was KO'd so that the winner could win indeed. Let's get to that data now.
Sure.
I had tracked this in 2024 as well, and you started tracking yours this year. But when I compare my new pie chart to the last year's pie chart, they look nearly exactly the same. They could be twins. The combat wins, 105 of my 175 games were won via combat. So that is a 60% share of how games officially ended was through combat damage. One big final swing in some fashion. Damage/life loss, so like pings or an X-spell or Perforos type of damage, that got 24% of the pie chart. 43 games ended that way. And the rest is super tiny, like 10 games or less. So barely 5% of the games won via combo, barely 5% won via commander damage. I was happy for Mill. Mill got 3 entire wins this year. That's still only 1.7% of the pie chart, but I am proud of Mill. Good for you, Mill. Curiously, I saw 0 poison/infect wins at all this year, 0% for those. So that's not even represented on my pie chart. But my 2024 data and my 2025 data look nearly the same. How does yours look?
Very, very similar. Combat damage wound up being 72% of mine, but like there was probably some of those that you would have counted a little bit differently. The direct damage was 16%.
Okay.
So a little bit lower than yours, but you play decks that like are designed to win via non-combat damage specifically.
Yes.
So you yourself, playing your whatever Aristocrats deck you have or playing Conrad probably tweaks those numbers up in your case in a way that they don't for me as well. So like that probably counts a lot of that difference right there is just your own decks.
My signature deck is Babala Saga, who has a life loss ability right there stapled onto her.
Yep.
And this is something that we noted in the data of 2024 is like our own personal deck bias has a bit to do with how things are factoring here, with how the wins are tracked and like how it's based off of what we played as well. I do think it's important to note that when it comes to the other stuff that we saw, combo, we saw very little of. Poison, we again saw very little. You had 3% of games end via poison or infect. Looks like you actually also counted alt win condition as poison and infect as well. You lumped that all into one category?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
And again, this is probably biased because of me. I have one deck that I'm still running that's kind of based around winning via poison, and I have one alt win con deck that's using Helix Pinnacle. So like that alone, those two decks probably swung those numbers up higher than yours, just again because of the biases of the deck I'm playing.
But even then, it's not a high figure. You have 9 games total of the 300 that you played.
And another thing that probably makes a difference here too is because neither of us are really combo players, there's probably, because I've heard people say this when we sat down and said, okay, what are you playing? And I'm like, well, I'm playing this deck. I don't have any combos. I've actually had folks say, oh, well, if you're not playing combo, I won't play this deck then. So that also probably biases the data towards combo. There are probably folks out there, if you are playing a combo deck, there's probably a higher likelihood that not only do you see wins via combo because you're playing combo, folks are going to play combo against you, I would wager. So like that is probably something that's biased to us not playing combo.
100%. That's the other thing I wanted to get to as well. Our combo rates here on each of our charts are very, very tiny. But a big reason for that is because we're obviously playing a lot more in the 2 and bracket 3 spaces compared to being in the bracket 4 and bracket 5 spaces, where that type of gameplay is a lot more regular, a lot more encouraged, a lot more, everyone's going super cutthroat, that kind of deal. So this is not, we're not the Lorax, we're not speaking for the trees.
Right.
This is our particular slice of a very mid-range battle cruisery bracket 3 type of space that we just personally prefer to operate in. But I do think that this is still actionable in certain ways, knowing that there is this much share of the pie that is a result of combat being a huge factor in the final moments of the game. That is one of the reasons why we say you should play some pretty good fogs in your deck. You should probably play more of those prevent combat damage, because clearly it's a really important way that factors into a lot of endgame. There are several games that I won this year via playing an Arachnogenesis or an Ink Shield, because someone thought that they were going to Crater Hoof me, and I said, no, I'm going to get you back, actually. And that was... That plays a not insignificant role in some of the success of our decks.
And one thing I will note here, I'm curious, I guess I didn't ask you how you calculated some of these things. So one of the things I noticed when I was putting the data together, that wasn't an intentional choice on my part, but it's just how I wound up doing it, was I kind of factored in intent of the how the game ended. So my Selesnya Dragon deck, I definitely killed people with Dromoka commander damage multiple times, where like I'd be in a situation where Dromoka would have, 8 or 10 counters on Dromoka, and then I would double them at instant speed when I swung through to make it just be like a one-shot commander damage. That's not what the deck's trying to do. It just works out because it's a +1 counters deck, and like Dromoka is already big and has evasion, that relatively frequently that's a thing that just winds up accidentally happening. But I would just count that as a combat damage, because like the deck wasn't built as a Voltron deck. It's not designed to work that way. So did you factor that in at all, or did you just like, if someone died with commander damage, it was a commander damage kill?
For the commander damage specifically, if it was enough damage for that person to lose anyway, regardless of the commander damage, then I just not logged it as a combat kill. If it was specifically commander damage is the reason why this person, they had life points left over, but they hit that 21st point of commander damage or more that causes them to lose that way specifically, that's when I counted it as a commander damage kill.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So we probably have a little bit of swing here where like just how what we counted something as categorically probably made a difference. Yeah. But our numbers aren't that different between the two of us necessarily.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to point out too, you mentioned you have a deck that it is trying to win with an element of poison somewhere in there. There is that intent there. I do think it's important for me to note that even though I saw poison win literally 0 games, I don't know how many decks actually were trying to win with poison throughout my year. For most part, you see a commander and you're like, oh, it's a Vishgraz. I know that one is trying to do infect stuff. There are going to be a couple of decks that have like a surprise Tainted Strike in there that I don't know how much they were relying on that. So this could be also affected by like, what is the presence of poison versus how much it actually won. That's just a thing for me to know. The sample size is a little bit of a mystery there, but I do think it is still super, super low. So most people were not trying to win via mill, and most people were not trying to win via poison. So that's why those numbers are going to be lower, because there was just lesser representation of them in the first place. But that is still a thing that I want to keep in mind when I look at the format broadly. I'm like, well, combat is clearly a thing that I need to pay the most attention to, because it's not just that these things aren't winning. There's also not a whole lot of them represented across the games that I've played. With that, Dana, let's get into our next bit of data here. This one's of interest to a whole lot of folks. It is win rate by turn order. Did going first mean that you won more games in your Commander experience over the year? We each this year tracked our turn order. This is something that I tracked last year, 2024. You've joined me in on this practice. I do have to ask real quick before we get to the figure. Is it hard to do? Because it was hard for me to get into that habit, dude.
It was really challenging, yeah. One thing I actually appreciated about this, and I'm glad I did it, was I implemented a rule where I'm like, I'm not going to play 5-player games this year because I don't want to deal with like factoring that in. And I just like not playing 5-player games. It worked out great to give me a reason to not play 5-player games, and I don't regret that at all. So I would discovered I would rather sit out than play a 5-player game. I know there's ways to do it, but like So I've appreciated this stat tracking, if for no other reason than it gave me a reason to finally be like, I'm just not playing 5-player games.
That's super funny. I can relate to that. It does exponentially add a lot more time when there's a whole other person, and all those rounds do go longer. So I feel that. I definitely understand where you're coming from there. It's a funny thing to note. I point out that it was kind of difficult to track this because I do want to remind folks that there is a lot of room for user error here.
Yes.
We might have mistracked some of these things. So do take all of our data, not just as like it's our own slice of life here, but also with a grain of salt in case we have mistracked anything. Anyway, I want to get to the answer to the question for me in 2025. Were there any differences in win rates based off of player order, player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4, all of that? The answer is a big ol' nope. It's a dang big no. My player 1 win percentage was 26, nearly 27%. Player 2 win percentage was 24.6. Player 3 won 24% of the time, and player 4 won 25% of the time. And I'm going to put on screen my rates from last year's data, where player 1 won 23% of the time. And it was, again, pretty evenly scrambled. Like there was a 26, a 24. But it is all still relatively even. It is very minor shifts. It is not an extreme or exaggerated difference where player 1 is winning 30% of the time or even 35, 40% of the time. There doesn't seem to be a huge, enormous factor, at least in terms of the games that I'm playing. Again, primarily within the bracket 2 and especially bracket 3 spaces. But Dana, that is just my data. What about all of yours?
My data looks exactly like yours. Turn 1 for me won slightly more often. It was at 26%. But then turn 2 was at 24. And turn 3, turn 4, 25.
Okay.
So the fact that like turn 4 was the second best winning percentage just behind turn 1. And we're talking a percentage point over the course of 300 games for some of these. Like it's just basically a non-factor for the most part, as far as I'm concerned, looking at these data sets from you for a couple of years and mine from 1 year.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem to make a difference, really.
Yeah, I feel as though that bears out. I'm actually really happy that we have another person's data here to kind of corroborate or compare against my data, because I was like, oh, this might be just very particularly bespoke to only my own experience. But it's interesting to see that it went nearly exactly the same for your experience as well. Definitely worth noting, though, that like the higher up you get into like bracket 5, the CEDH spaces, turn order is going to play a much bigger factor because there are probably, on average, across those games, going to be fewer turns across the entire thing versus us when we're playing, a greater amount of turns in the spaces that we play at. This is the type of factor that does kind of get smoothed out over the course of each of those, or players are responding to an early threat in a way that makes it not as big a threat later on in the game, etc. So that is something for us to pay attention to.
Yeah, I would definitely wager in that bracket 5, the first and second player having access to the blue elemental blast, red elemental blast kind of things. Right. When the person takes their third or fourth turn, it probably makes a huge difference in ways that we just don't see. So it wouldn't shock me if like you were a CEDH player tracking this data where you're seeing a 5% difference in turn 1, turn 2 between turn 3 and 4. But the space we're playing, we just don't see anything.
Yeah. And if we do ever note that the format just in general starts to get faster and faster, which is a thing that we've like felt over time. And we've had a couple of episodes in the past kind of drawing attention to like mana curves getting lower over time and stuff like that. But if we do see that continue to exaggerate even further, then I imagine that could start to have a bigger effect on our game data as well. But right now we're not currently seeing that, which is a nice thing to keep in mind. If people are saying that like going first has a huge effect, for our experiences at least, that hasn't necessarily been the case. And so that's worth just, again, as our personal slice of life here, but that is something that I'm carrying as a piece of information. I'm not going to worry a whole lot about whoever goes first based off of this. It doesn't feel justified for me to change any of my game actions as a result of whoever it is that's going first based in my games.
Yeah. So playing the tapped Shockland first go or tapped Shockland fourth go doesn't make a huge difference in bracket 2 or bracket 3 for the most part.
Yeah. All right. That, though, leads us to, talking about games speeding up, the format speeding up or anything like that. That takes us to our next data point here. The average game length. How long did games go? This has been an especially interesting one to track over time. We've got new figures here. I made the habit of tracking both when the game ended, what turn it ended on, as well as when the first person was KO'd, when the first knockout happened. Is that something that you tracked as well, or were you just focusing on game end, just to make sure we can compare it?
I just focused on where the game ended. So that's all I paid attention to, was when the game actually ended.
Makes sense. Absolutely. So in that case, our data sets will be a little bit different here, but let's go ahead and get them on screen. Dana, when did you see that games ended most often?
So on average, my games ended in closing in on turn 9, 8.7 was the average. Again, almost all my games, 90+% were a bracket 2 or bracket 3. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What did yours look like?
It's decently similar, but there is a difference here worth interrogating. My average game end I noted being on turn 9.4, but the average first KO I noted being on turn 8.2. I do want to note, though, this is definitely a question worth asking in terms of how it is that we tracked that figure. It's important for me to call out that I tracked this from my perspective, not from the objective, this is the start of the round, I'm tracking from the first player, and then I tick up when it hits their turn again. This is a very natural flaw in the way that I have tracked my data. The reason that I'm doing it is because it's the only way I've been able to actually keep up that pattern of behavior without completely bombing at it. Because the times that I've tried to track it a different way, it's been so inaccurate. This is a way that when I track it just from my own POV, I actually maintain the habit. So this is a flaw in the way that I've tracked my data that does probably affect things. I need to check with you, Dana, whether you tracked your data in a different way than I did.
I did, but not.
Okay.
But I also have your flaw baked in. So the first flaw in all of this is this is where the turn order maybe does make a difference.
Okay.
The fourth person going who gets knocked out in turn 8 technically only played 7 turns, more or less. They didn't get a chance to play their 8th turn. So number one, that's a difference, and neither of us really counted that. We just roughly clocked the turn order. But the second big difference is I didn't count turns over 10. I just had a 10 plus in my spreadsheet. So if the game went 30 turns, I don't think I had none that went that long, but if it went 12 turns or 14 turns or something, that was just a 10 for me. And I think you individually logged each of those turns.
Yes, I did. Yeah. If a game went to turn 12 or 13 I think I have a game that went to turn 16 or something like that. I think that was the longest a game went in my data. But yeah, that is a really important thing to note because you just have a 10 plus field rather than each individual thing. And that does naturally mean that your average is of course going to be a little bit lower.
Right.
So we can't directly compare our data here.
Yeah.
It is a little bit different in the way we tracked it. Okay.
So,
that's good.
So I would wager once you factor that in, our games are probably pretty close in terms of average length.
Yes, I think that's fair. And I think that also based off of, again, the bias of how I tracked my data, people could also knock a certain number off of mine because, again, I'm not tracking from objectively the start of the round. I'm tracking from my POV, even if I was the fourth player. So there is a flaw here for sure that you can factor in. But regardless, if we're taking this as sort of a tentative slight baseline, it's interesting to note that we are seeing, relatively, let's call it a turn 8 is when we can expect someone probably got knocked out, probably, if not moving towards, we are in end game territory. And that does feel when we start looking at the bracket system, when we start looking at the turn counts that they introduced in brackets, the beta system 2.0 for brackets, it's all right, cool. It's not like games are ending on turn 6 and we're calling that a bracket 2. There is something that feels kind of nice and in line here, I think, with the way that system is trying to represent the format.
I have a question for you because I'm curious your answer because I know what mine is. Are you ever kind of surprised at how long the game has gone? And in your head, you're like, oh, this is only turn 5. And you check and you're like, well, this is actually turn 7. Is that something where you feel like games are shorter than the actual turn length winds up being? Or do you notice the inverse? Or do you not notice anything that seems odd in terms of perception?
It's for me, it has 100% been the inverse. Since I am tracking it and I've been doing this for 3 years now, I feel like I've gotten a better sense of it. But the thing that I notice all of the time is that when people speculate, they'll ask me, they'll be like, oh, what turn was that? Was that turn 10? People will always estimate 1, if not 2 turns higher than what it actually is.
Yep. Same thing for me.
Yeah, games might end on a turn 7 or a turn 8 or something when we're playing around in the bracket 3 space, and people are like, "Oh, is that turn 9?" Because it feels like it went longer. Yeah. But it's just that the ending rounds of a game of Commander tend to be longer time-wise.
Exactly.
But it is actually just like a whole lot happens in that, round 7 and round 8 and round 9.
Yeah.
So yeah, that tends to be the case for me, is that it's the inverse of what you were saying.
Yeah, I'm always kind of surprised when I go, even myself having gotten a little bit used to it, I'm still like, because of those long turns at the end, it seems like you're going more than you actually are.
Yeah. I do want to note how my turn data compares to my previous year's data real quick. We see relatively a similar pattern, which if anything, I'm kind of surprised by. In 2023, I found that games ended on turns 9.4. In 2024, I saw them ending on turn 9.8. And then here in 2025, I again have that figure of 9.4. The first KO has maintained relative consistency at turn 8.1, then 8.3, and then turn 8.2. So I'm actually seeing a lot of consistency there across all 3 of my years of data here, which to me, I didn't expect to happen. I feel as though the format has gotten faster, and I expected to see a downtick across these figures rather than sort of things staying the same. I kind of don't know what to make of that. I feel reassured by it, but I still also feel surprised by it. I don't know if this matches up with what you expected or the way that you feel through osmosis about the way that the format is going and how people are playing it.
Absolutely. I would have expected the fact that the format's gotten faster. Commanders have gotten better. Like when we were playing, 10 years ago, you were playing with cards that weren't designed for Commander, and there were a few that were accidentally amazing, but like by and large, that wasn't the case. We get 10 Commanders every year that are better than the best Commanders printed prior to 2015.
Yeah.
And we get 10 of them every year. But I also feel like maybe people have gotten better at deck building and gotten better at putting answers in their decks. And the answers have gotten better too. Like, it wasn't that long ago, Black didn't have any responses to, enchantments, and they have some now. Blue has some responses to, artifacts. Blue has some responses to enchantments it didn't once have. White's got some card draw. Red's got much better card draw. So I wonder if that hasn't offset it a little bit, like Commanders have gotten better. The game's gotten faster in theory, but your ability to respond to that level of speed has gotten better. I'm just guessing.
Theory. Yeah, no, that's an interpretation I'm comfortable with. I can't, we don't know for 100% certain. And again, it could just be down to like, maybe I'm bad at tracking my data. Maybe there are flaws here that are not representing themselves in my final results or something. But I'm only tracking the past 3 years, obviously. And if those 3 years feel all sort of like part of the same creature, part of the same monster of like the type of design space that we're in, it's not like I'm tracking this data against the data that happened of the games that I played 10 years ago. So that I feel like would be a hugely different comparison for sure. But this is all told a relatively compact space to look at. So it probably is a little bit silly of me to expect that there would be a really obvious, exaggerated way to see things. This is probably a little bit more gradual of a thing, and 3 years is not a whole lot in terms of the actual relative lifespan of the game. I like your removal theory a whole lot too. It is worth noting that, we have things like Farewell. We have even the new Avatar's Wrath card is really good, but that's going to add time. The Wraths have gotten more sophisticated as well. So sophisticated removal in addition to powerful commanders is potentially an interpretation that I like here as a way to be like, the problems have gotten bigger, but so have the answers gotten more sophisticated to try and line up with them. That makes sense. Guess what? Our favorite deck builder, Architect, just released a really cool new feature, uploading custom cards. A lot of folks like to homebrew or invent cards for house rules or just test out their own game designs, and Architect now has a place where you can customize your own card, name, cost, types, text box, and put it right into your deck, where it will be treated just like any other card would. You can make a card that is totally blank or upload your very own custom image of your custom card. And yes, when you make your designs, not only will they count towards all of your deck's stats, such as tracking things like your mana curve, your pips, your types, to make sure that all of the stats of your deck are accurate, to make sure you're getting the very best deck information, but also all the designs that you invent or upload are usable in the Architect playtester, which is of course the very best playtester in the biz. What's really exciting is that this new feature has also laid the groundwork for Architect to support uploading alters of cards too. So if you want to upload your own custom images of pre-existing cards, the fine folks at Architect have even more stuff cooking. So let them know if that's something that you'd like to see in the future. Check out our deck lists at architect.com/EDHRECast to keep up with all of our brews and try making your own custom cards while you're at it. That's archidekt.com/EDHRECast. This video is sponsored by Commander Rules Deck. Listen, Commander is the greatest game in the world, but it's also complicated. Every playgroup has common questions. The steps of combat, or layers, or how priority works, or what protection means. Rules Deck is a quick reference deck of rules cards that will help you immediately, easily reduce all confusion around weird rules edge cases and avoid any disputes about how things are supposed to work. It's designed like premium TCG cards, portable and intuitive, and they save you a lot of time having to look up forums or Reddit posts or the sheer block of text that is the comprehensive rulebook, or all of those things that can slow down or break up the flow of Commander games so that you can just get right back to the fun. Check them out at the link in the description. Get Rules Deck to upgrade your game night.
So how about the difference in bracket in how long the games go? Because like I didn't track that, and I find it really interesting that you did and what the data shows.
Yes. Now let's start getting into some bracket stuff. So this is just a total average. I did go through my data, and this took forever. Listeners, I hope you like it, to track relatively what I thought each game's bracket was. This is a little bit fuzzy. Brackets were introduced partway through the year, early on, I think it was February, but still that does mean that some of this is fuzzy. We didn't quite have the language for it. And the other part of it too is what I'm playing my deck as a bracket does not mean that that's what everyone else is also playing. There's a lot of room for mismatches here. Mm-hmm. But for now, we're going to try to answer the question, is the bracket system accurate? Does the expected game length proposed by the Wizards bracket graphic, at least 8 turns can be expected at bracket 2, you can expect to play at least 6 turns at bracket 3, etc. Does that hold water? We'll break down the data and potential lessons about bracket mismatches in greater detail next week, but the accuracy is our big question today. So first, let's get to know our sample sizes, especially to help folks know our POV, but also our potential biases. So Dana, how many games did you play in each bracket in 2025?
Of my 332 games I played this year, 315 of them were in bracket 2 or bracket 3. So I was almost exclusively living in that space.
Wow, yeah. So you spent virtually no time in brackets 1 and 4.
Yeah.
As a quick note for listeners, yes, we know that there's a lot of room for debate on which games actually count as being in which bracket and the possible bias of decks being potentially misrepresented either by other players or if we have mislabeled them ourselves. That is something I want to flag as a bigger conversation in the deck data next week when we're breaking the individual decks down. And this is also something that I've already mentioned to you, Dana, that I'd like to kind of grill you about whether certain decks that we think are 2s and 3s should actually become labeled as like bracket 3s and bracket 4s. Yep. But I digress. That's not our focus right now. I just wanted to mention it. I still have to name my sample size here. So for my breakdown of bracket games in 2025, I played just 6 games at bracket 1. And even then, note that just because I was playing a bracket 1 deck doesn't mean the entire pod was. Often there would be like 2 1s and 2 2s or something. But then I also played 60 games at bracket 2, 93 games at bracket 3, and only 16 games at bracket 4. I played no CEDH in 2025. So, getting the lay of the land, that is where we're spending the majority of our time.
And we're going to delve into a lot of our personal game data too in the next episode. We have a lot of more high level stuff to talk about in this show, but it's useful for context so you understand basically what space we're playing in.
Yes, our win percentage by bracket, that'll be interesting. We'll save that for next week. But right now we're looking at game length and whether the bracket question is accurate. We'll be looking at the results from my data set here. This is something that I logged that Dana didn't, but in the next episode we'll see some stuff that Dana logged that I didn't. So that'll be fun. But yeah, just for clarity. Mm-hmm. Let's go through it now. I'll throw this chart on screen. When we look at the games that I played in bracket 1, when did they end and when was the first KO? The game ended in bracket 1 on turn 10.7, but the first KO was on turn 9. Note, I have very few games at bracket 1 exhibition. This is a super small sample size. Please take that with a boulder of salt. At bracket 2, core, the game ended on average on turn 9.4, but the first KO happened on average on turn 8.5. On bracket 3, upgraded, the game ended on turn 9, and the first KO was on turn 8. And then in bracket 4, the game ended on turn 8.7, and the first KO was on turn 7.7. Bracket 5, I do not have any data for that. I did not play any CEDH this year. Again, some of these figures are going to have different sample sizes than the others. I'm averaging out a whole lot of stuff here. Boulder of salt. But I find it very interesting to see that when we just look down, bracket 1, turn 10, bracket 2, turn 9.4, bracket 3, turn 9, bracket 4, turn 8.7, you see a line get drawn there and okay, yeah, there is an element of speed that is accurately represented when I'm looking through and tracking which, games fell into which brackets. It feels accurate. It feels right. If anything, it's a little gradual. It's not a steep thing, but we see a big difference. So it's worth noting.
You see a big difference, but I guess I would also note a 2-turn difference between decks that can run every single game changer and any amount of tutors and any amount of combos versus a deck that's like, ladies looking left or guys with mustaches or whatever. Right. That's not nearly the difference that you might think there would be. And obviously you're running better answers in those bracket 4 decks as well. So like that makes a difference. But yeah, a 2-turn clock difference between bracket 1 and bracket 4. I don't know that I was expecting a 4-turn difference, but 2 seems relatively small given the power discrepancy between those two levels.
Yeah, if anything, I kind of maybe expected the bracket 4 optimized game end to be much lower. I expected that maybe there would be like a steeper drop off, an actual like cliff's edge there rather than a gradual ramp. But so far that doesn't seem to be the case. I do imagine that there could, of course, be an error in the way that I'm tracking these. You do kind of have to take my word for it that, yes, I believe that this was a bracket 4 game, or yes, I believe this is a bracket 3 game that most of the group agreed upon. So like that, there is definitely a flaw in the way that I'm tracking these. But yeah, in general, I do feel like this is painting a picture, but it's a picture that makes sense, but it is also still a surprise. I also do imagine that if I had played a lot of CEDH, that is probably where I would see that cliff's edge. That's where I would see that drop off, that there could be, it might go from like bracket 4, I see games ending on turn 8.7. It could very well be that if I had played a lot of CEDH this year, that I would see that games on average end on turn 6 or something like that. Yeah. There could be a bigger drop off there, but at least in the places that I am playing, the spaces that I'm navigating so far, it's a little bit more gradual. But, we'll see as the brackets themselves get more defined and people have better language to set the stage for those particular games. This could be a thing that becomes a lot more distinct, if anything. So I think that this could evolve next year when I track my data for 2026.
Yeah, and next year I'm looking forward to it because number one, like you mentioned, brackets weren't really a thing. They weren't announced till February, and like folks probably didn't implement them even really in their decks maybe till March. So we're losing a third or a fourth of the year basically where brackets weren't a thing. And then we had a change this fall as well, and that actually impacted a couple of my decks too. Where I'm like, okay, well this one, the removal, like I mentioned, I have a Helix Pinnacle deck built around that. Well, that was a bracket 3 deck, because I had to have some amount of tutors to like consistently get Helix Pinnacle. Once they changed that restriction, like, okay, I can make that a bracket 2 deck. It's not a good deck, but I can still run like 4 or 5 mediocre tutors in there to be able to go get Helix Pinnacle when I need it in that deck. So like there's some changes there too, whereas next year we should more or less have a consistent bracket the entirety of 2026. So I'll be interested to see how that changes next year once we have a year where everything is much more solid.
That's a really good point. And a thing that I, again, want to point out here is that there is going to be fundamentally, but like there could be a lot of people who looked through each of the games that I played and come to a different conclusion about which games fall into which bracket as well. Because the other part of this is that there were definitely games that I played where like I was playing a precon and everyone else was on a bracket 3. There were definitely games that I played. Dana, you were part of one of them where we played Joe Johnson's bracket 4 decks, but we only had so many. And so I played my Baracus deck, which is definitely a 3. And still won that one, by the way. Still won. It was pretty cool. But by pure coincidence, it was a really funny series of events. But like there were definitely those moments, and that does call into question, cool, where did I log that? I logged that as a bracket 4 game, even though I was playing the bracket 3. That doesn't mean that I log it as a bracket 3 game, but like some people might disagree about the way that they evaluate those. Or what do you do when there's like 2 people who are like, I'm pretty sure these are 2s, and 2 people who are like, I'm pretty sure these are 3s. That's a perfectly acceptable type of game to have, but where do you put it? And so the decisions that I made might be different than decisions other people made. So again, boulders of salt to be taken with all of these figures.
Yeah, like if you're playing with your family and like your mom busts out a bracket 3 and you're like, I just played my bracket 3 twice. I'm just gonna grab a bracket 2. Who cares? Because you're playing with your family or you're playing with your friend group or whatever it is. I played a game this last night where I played a bracket 1 deck against a couple of bracket 2s and a bracket 3 because I just wanted to get one more rep with the game. I was playing with friends, nobody cared. That's going to sometimes happen in situations and throws the math off a little bit. Is what it is.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I'm also very impressed with you that you played a game literally last night and you still managed to factor all that data into the stuff that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Good for you. That was a quick turnaround. That's fast. All right. There's one other thing about game length that I want to put in here too. This is a figure that I tracked that it doesn't sound like you tracked again. It's actually also the effects of fast mana. Did you track turn 1 Sol Ring stuff, Dana?
So I did, but I screwed up halfway through the year. I already told you this story. At some point, I switched from tracking whether or not I played fast mana on turn 1. And it wasn't just Sol Ring. I was counting like maybe a wild growth onto a land or something. anything that would be a turn one fast mana. I was tracking that. And at some point I switched to did anyone play it versus did I play it? And I noticed that at some point, I'm like, well, now that data set's useless. So I will try to do it next year and track it for the table and keep track of who played fast mana and how that impacted their win percentage specifically versus whatever mess of data I logged this year for it.
That's a really good thing to point out. Again, when it comes to potential flaws in our data, we're trying our best here, but I'm glad that you noticed like, oh, this is a mistake in tracking. That means we can't draw any conclusions. So let's not even have it. Let's scrap that. Try again next year. Super appreciate that perspective. Because the other thing to note, if folks are wondering, oh, why didn't you track X, Y, or Z? It's because this is actually getting a little bit hard. We're tracking a whole lot of stuff. At first, I was just tracking each deck that I played and how well it did. And then I was like, well, maybe I can track player order as well. And then maybe I can also track other things too, like fast mana. And it turns out that this gets a little bit like, oh, I'm tracking a lot more than I thought I would. So there's only so many things that I can pay attention to before I'm ripping myself out of the experience of actually playing Commander. So I totally understand how you would like have a mistake in what you're tracking. That makes a whole lot of sense to me. And I'm sure especially with my first 2 years of tracking it, I fell into those mistakes a whole lot more. I've kind of got a pattern now, but it still takes a long time to get into that pattern. Anyway, let's talk about fast mana. I've got this figure here. I was able to track how often did a turn 1 Soul Ring mean that person won that game. I saw 19 games where Soul Ring was played on turn 1. So that means I saw a turn 1 Soul Ring in about 10% of the games that I played, give or take. And in 12 of those 19 games, the player who landed the Soul Ring won that game. That is a win rate of 63%. Good for you, turn 1 Soul Ring. If people land that, attack them. I think we all already know that, but I did not see a deleterious effect on that. I did see it being quite a boon.
Yeah, that's not surprising at all, and particularly because it tends to be a cascading thing. Not only obviously do they have mana every turn going forward, how often do you see a turn 1 Soul Ring into a turn 1 Signet or Talisman or whatever? Yeah. Like the Soul Ring enables the next big thing as well, and the ability to drop one does make a difference. I'm not at all surprised to see that.
There has been speculation in the community before about like, does having an early lead, especially that early, mean that everyone targets you for the rest of the game and that it actually is a detriment to you if you have early fast mana? That has been speculated by other people. I know Command Zone has done data about this before. This is years and years ago, but they were actually tracking, I believe, fast mana within the first several turns. And like that, basically we were studying completely fundamentally different data sets. So that's a thing to put out there, but they noticed a different effect than what I've noticed here. This has been relatively consistent across my years of data. I believe last year when I tracked this, it was roughly a 50 to 54% win percentage for Soul Ring. This year, I definitely saw it helping out a lot more. That is a thing that I just felt is kind of worth noting here. There's going to be a difference of opinion about these. I am noticing this decently consistency across my data, but it's kind of just worth keeping in mind that, if someone gets an early lead, we should probably all mess with them. People might speculate that like, oh, if they get an early lead, so many people are messing with them that it actually means I shouldn't worry too much. But I do think that you still need to do the messing is ultimately the message here. You can't just rely upon like, oh, they'll be messed with. You are the one who has to have the agency to go do the messing with them if they got that early lead. And I also kind of can't help but wonder if like getting your commander out a turn faster, let's say you have a 4-mana commander, getting the value engine that our commanders are so powerful these days, if that is one of the things that also lends it to having such that greater effect, is because of how supercharged some of the commanders can be these days. Specifically, it is the act of getting the commander out earlier that makes this such an impressive figure.
I think one thing that impacts this as well is the ubiquity of Soul Ring, because everyone has access to one for, $150 to put in their deck. They're in every precon, whatever. I think people's response to seeing a turn 1 Soul Ring in terms of like being intimidated or realizing it's a threat is different than it was when someone would drop a Mana Crypt that was an expensive card and much less likely to show up in a pod or at a table. Despite being a very similar power level, when someone would drop a crypt, the response was almost always, oh, okay, this is serious.
Is that kind of thing. Yeah.
And when someone drops a Soul Ring, they're like, oh man, you got a Soul Ring on turn 1. Like, I think people are much more likely to swing at the crypt player than they are the Soul Ring player. And despite crypt being gone, I think that's still kind of the attitude. It's something that everyone's so used to seeing that I think people in lower brackets maybe don't respond appropriately to it.
Interesting. A thing that I do also want to note, I didn't just track whether they won. I also tracked the game length when a Soul Ring was present. To remind folks, my average game, and just to get that original figure here, across all of the game usually ended on turn 9.4 and the average first KO was on turn 8.2. But in games where fast mana was present, there was definitely effect of like, oh yeah, no, the entire game does go faster as a result of that. Games that contained any turn 1 Soul Ring at all, the game ended on turn 8.5 and the first KO was on turn 7.5. So like we're knocking a full at least half of a round off of each of those. And particularly in games where the Soul Ring person won, the game ended usually on turn 7.2 and the first KO was on turn 6.8. So these are just some extra figures and some extra context I wanted to put in there. That speed ends up being a huge factor for them, and that's extra context I wanted to make sure that we added to the conversation about the effects of, turn 1 fast mana.
What about times where Soul Ring didn't win? Did you notice anything like that jumps out at you where someone had that and it wound up with them not winning the game?
Actually, yes. That is definitely a discrepancy to point out here. Games where Soul Ring won, they ended on turn 7.2, but games where the person with the Soul Ring lost tended to end on turn 10.8. Again, super tiny sample size here, but I think that there's a story here with those figures. Like games where you did deal with that person, where you did deal with a person who got off to such a great start, to my eye, this reads as it took so much removal, like there was so much more removal present, that therefore the entire game kind of like had to take a bit of a breather to recover from each of those stages, because it probably involved maybe multiple board wipes, which will inevitably add an extra round to every game. So that is something that I think that I'm seeing here. It isn't like when a person gets a Soul Ring and then they are not able to be dealt with, then of course it's going to be, a faster game. But games where they get a Soul Ring and you can deal with them, the way that you dealt with them was probably with mass removal of some kind. And mass removal inevitably is going to make the game go longer. So that's just a thing that I feel like I'm personally reading in here, but I notice a discrepancy here. It isn't just like Soul Ring games are always faster. If you do deal with them, the game probably just ends up going a little bit longer than my typical average, at least according to, again, my slice of life here.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wonder if it's also like maybe a style situation where a more control-y deck, a more control-y pod, where games are going to tend to go longer, people are just going to have more answers, or they're going to like be able to drag things out and maybe nullify that like early mana burst impact from a Soul Ring.
Yeah.
If the person can't race off to an early lead because there's a lot more control happening, a lot more removal happening, then everyone else kind of catches up by turn 4 or turn 5 by playing their own ramp and hitting their own Soul Ring or whatever. And when games are going to naturally go longer in that kind of environment, the advantage gets kind of rounded off.
Yes. Yeah. That is just a thing for us to note. It's once you see it, the story does all make a whole lot of sense, but it's good to actually have confirmation of some of these like abstract feelings. It's just like, no, I can actually point to something that feels, at least for me, especially compared to the other times that I've been tracking it over the past year, that there's a consistency here that isn't just I'm relying upon my feelings here. I've actually got some data to back up some of those feelings, or to at least understand them a little bit better is nice to have. And I hope, Dana, for the next year that you did get your Soul Ring data without too much error in the tracking. Which again is perfectly understandable. Like I joke about that here, but for all I know, I'll mess up in my tracking and I'll have to scrap some element that we've tracked this year that I won't be able to have next year. So could totally happen. User error. We are flawed people. There's only so much we can do, but we are trying our best here. So.
Well, since we've been going over data this entire episode, I guess it makes sense to continue to do that and maybe challenge some stats.
Hey, yeah, why the heck not? There's so much other data here on EDHREC that we don't always agree with. So let's talk about cards that we think are over or underplayed.
So I have kind of a weird challenge this week. I'm not specifically challenging a card, more of a concept. And this happened because I have a Felisa Fang of Silver Quill deck that's built around using the mechanic modular. So for those that don't know, modular creatures come into play with some amount of counters on them. And when those creatures die, you can move those counters onto another artifact creature. It was really only ever in one set, and there's been a couple modular creatures that have came out since then, but in order to have enough modular creatures in that deck, I've had to run a lot of very bad ones. I can supplement that with creatures that are artifact ones that come into play with +1 counters, but like those counters don't necessarily move around. I can just move counters onto those creatures. One of the bad ones I was kind of forced to run just to have enough is Arcbound Worker, which is just a 1-drop that has modular and comes into play with a single counter on it. However, in doing some digging, I came across the card Iron Apprentice that basically has modular, but it's not the keyword. It's just written whenever this creature dies, you can move the counter onto another creature. And unlike modular, it's not restricted to moving it to an artifact creature. That doesn't make much difference in my deck, but it's technically a better version of Arcbound Worker. And I never found it when I was building that deck because I was just searching for things with modular. Similarly, for example, say you're playing an Infect deck. You're probably looking for things with Infect, but you're probably also missing out on some of the pre-Infect creatures that have poison, or there's an enchantment, Snake Cult Initiation, that gives a creature poisonous and puts poison counters on something. So my challenge here is just a general hint to people that if you're building a deck doing a very specific thing, broaden your search terms with whatever search engine you're using, Scryfall, whatever it happens to be. Don't just focus on the keywords. Search for things that do the things you're already doing.
Right.
Because it's very easy to miss out on stuff if it doesn't have that keyword or it doesn't specifically say Infect. There's a lot of things out there that would be useful for you that you actually have to just dig deep to find in the first place.
And don't be afraid to dig across different colors as well.
Yeah.
I used to have a Martin Stromgold mono red tokens deck, and now I have a black-white Thalisse tokens deck. But the ways that they win have a lot of commonalities, and there were artifacts from the original red deck that I had that still transfer over to being useful in the Thalisse deck as well. So don't be afraid to look for inspiration, not just broadening your scope there, but also broadening color scope as well, just to find potential ideas too. That's a great challenge and a good reminder.
Yeah, and good advice about the looking at the color pie as well. Like the red thing and some of those cards transferring to white-black makes sense.
Well, I'll move on to my challenge now, and my challenge here is actually our first listener challenge of the year. It comes to us from our Discord patron with the username Looking for a Fourth, who would like to point out a very fun little number for Nico Light of Hope decks. Nico is the Azorius 4-mana 3/4 that enters the battlefield and makes shard tokens, and which then you can pay 2 mana to tap Nico and blink a creature you control and make all of your shard tokens into a copy of whatever you blinked for that turn, as long as it's not a legendary creature. This obviously is a blink-heavy deck in general. I looked through the average Nico deck according to EDHREC data, and the average Nico deck contains at least 16 blink-enabling cards. So yeah, this deck is flickering a whole lot of stuff for value, often Nico to get even more of those tokens, but value isn't victory. You need a way to actually close out the game, and Looking for a Fourth suggests that a nice way to do that could be the little innocuous card Signal Pest, a 1-mana artifact creature that can't be blocked except by flying and reach, and which has Battle Cry, so when it attacks, your whole team gets +1/+0. This card is currently showing up in 58 of the 7,400 Nico decks out there, so in just 0.7% of the Nico decks out there. This interaction is really clever. During the game, you'll likely have flickered Nico a couple of times maybe and collected a couple of extra shard tokens to turn into copies of things. And so then with Signal Pest, for just 1 mana, you can deploy that little pest and then activate Nico for 2 mana to flicker the pest and turn all of your shard tokens into Signal Pests and go for a swing. And what's beautiful about this interaction is how the damage amplifies exponentially. If you have 4 copies on the attack, they'll give your other creatures +4 each, and the Signal Pests will be attacking with 12 extra flying power. If you have 6 copies, say you flickered Nico twice during the game, that'll be 30 extra flying damage, and all of your other creatures will each get a +6 boost. If you have 8 copies, then just the group of Signal Pests will be attacking for 56 damage. You're probably going to knock someone out, not to mention the other 8 power that you're giving to each of your other creatures you already control. And all of that just for a 1-mana Signal Pest and a 2-mana Nico activation. I highly encourage folks to look into more effects like this for a Nico deck, from Battle Cry effects to melee effects, as a cool endgame opportunity for Nico. And thank you to our patron, Looking for a Fourth, for suggesting this really neat interaction. And Looking for a Fourth, I hope that you find your fourth.
I just played against a friend's new Nico deck last night, and I am absolutely going to not suggest this card for that list. So hopefully he doesn't watch this show this week.
Oh, dang. That's so funny. You know, Dana, I think now I understand why your win rate is so high. Love it.
Well, Challenge of Stats has been brought to you by Cardsphere. Cardsphere is the best way to turn cards from old decks into brand new decks. I just put together a deck for a Christmas present for someone, and I was missing 20-ish cards I wanted for my personal collection. and I put all of the ones I needed on CardSphere, and about a dozen were on their way that night, and I got the rest sent to me the next day. Every single card I needed for that deck on CardSphere was here in about 48 hours, and I was able to get the deck put together and wrapped under the Christmas tree. No problem at all. So go to cardsphere.com/EDHRECast and get started today. Well, I think that's going to kind of cover most of the kind of high-level data where we're looking at games and how they play with people in general and games we've played kind of overall. But we've got a bunch of data specifically about us and our decks and our commanders we can get into, and it's going to take a long time to cover all of that.
Yeah, this is definitely we're tracking so much stuff now that it justifies for us a two-parter. This will be something that we'll get a little bit more into our particular decks in another episode, and how it is that those things have performed and how that affects the win percentages and stuff that we have. But on that, bigger umbrella, on that broader level, it's been nice to go over some of these and track things like how it is that games are ending, the effects of combat versus life loss versus infect and things like that, or the game length, and even breaking down game length by bracket, seeing some of these trends, and does player one get a huge advantage? Seeing some of these things, it's been nice to get a broader understanding, especially like beginning the year on this foot. It's nice as a way of like recalibrating and being like, cool, I know sort of what I anticipate going into this next year, what I think games can feel like, and to begin to see if there are any of those things that are a spot of discomfort, for instance, that we can start to make a plan about how it is that we want to change anything in our approaches as well. So yeah, this is a whole lot to get through, and there's even more coming.
Yeah, having the bracket system to add context to a lot of this, I think, has made a huge difference from in past years when we looked at it. And I'm looking forward to seeing that data laid out against our own personal decks when we talk about that next.
Yeah, for sure. As a kind of closing question, do you feel as though the bracket system assisted you with any of the tracking across all of this, or had a big effect, bigger than you thought, or was it smaller than you thought? Are there any final thoughts about the ways that stuff like that within the community may have affected the things that you were tracking, or the way that you were tracking, or what the results actually were?
So for me, in this came up earlier in the show, talking about how I tend to play games more than you with strangers in at places. I think the bracket system made a really big difference in keeping people on the same page, at least for me and where I'm at. I saw a lot less mismatches. Just head-to-head playing in strangers, everyone had kind of a common measuring stick to use. Doesn't mean it's perfect, but I saw much less mismatches this year than I have previous years, for sure. And it was almost entirely due to the new brackets.
Cool. Yeah. I feel as though, especially understanding that one of those last things that we looked at, with the game length by bracket, that felt to me as though a little bit of a confirmation on the system is measuring something that feels accurate. The bracket system, it does have those expected game, turn 8 or turn 6 or stuff like that. And I notice my own stuff relatively falling in step with those expectations. So that felt like a nice, oh, okay, cool. When they put that estimate out there, it feels true to my own personal experience as well. It feels a little bit true to life here. So there have been a couple of little things like that for me have not quite confirmed or reinforced, but it's sort of in that ilk. It's taken some of these abstract feelings and made things a little bit more concrete for me, especially with the degree of consistency that we've seen across the years that we've been doing this project. So that's been a nice thing to see, and therefore to have a good mindset and a good understanding about what I can expect from Commander as I move into the next year and start tracking again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. With all of that, though, Dana, I think we've got to call this episode to a close. But of course, we also have got to hear from our listeners out there, too, all of our EDH reckoners out there. I want to know if other folks have tracked their data and if theirs is wildly different than ours. What do folks out there make of the figures that we've gone over here today? Are there any trends that they have noticed in their own games? Hit us up, let us know. And if folks do want to get in touch with us, Dana, where is it that they should go?
You can find me online at Dana Roach. I'm usually on Blue Sky these days. I'm writing articles for EDHREC, and you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And you can find me everywhere online, from Instagram to Blue Sky at Joseph M. Schultz. And you can find the cast online at EDHRECast on all the social media places. And of course, don't forget to check out Dragon Shield and use code EDHREC, all lowercase, for a discount on the best sleeves, which also have awesome magic art or even your own custom art. Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with even more of these data and insights. But until next time, remember, EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.